Welcome to Zivostoria. In the year 750 CE, the Islamic world saw a massive geopolitical transfer of power as the Umayyad capital of Damascus fell and the newly established Abbasid Caliphate centralized its authority in Baghdad. This political turnover triggered a precise epistemological shift in how human knowledge was processed, moving away from a primarily oral culture. They relied on human memory and spoken poetry to pass down historical events. Under Abbasid rule, that tribal system was replaced by a rigorously documented literary engine. Looking at early parchment manuscripts like this one, written in Kufic script, we see the physical evidence of this transition. The study of the past, known as tariq, separated from mythology and evolved into a highly organized, independent academic discipline. To understand how this happened, we are going to deconstruct the mechanics of Abbasid historiography. We will examine the economic catalysts that made it possible and the structural methodologies used to verify facts, the scholars who built the frameworks, and the inherent biases they left behind. To legitimize and manage their rapidly expanding empire, the Abbasid state required a dedicated historical science alongside its military conquests. Welcome to Zivostoria. In the year 750 CE, the Islamic world saw a massive geopolitical transfer of power as the Umayyad capital of Damascus fell and the newly established Abbasid Caliphate centralized its authority in Baghdad. This massive political turnover triggered a precise, fundamental epistemological shift in exactly how all human knowledge was processed. For centuries, Arab society operated as a primarily oral culture. They relied on human memory and spoken poetry to pass down historical events. Under Abbasid rule, that tribal system was replaced by a rigorously documented literary engine. Looking at early parchment manuscripts like this one, written in Kufic script, we see the physical evidence of this transition. The study of the past, known as tariq, separated from mythology and evolved into a highly organized, independent academic discipline. To understand how this happened, we are going to deconstruct the mechanics of Abbasid historiography. We will examine the economic catalysts that made it possible, the structural methodologies used to verify facts, the scholars who built the frameworks, and the inherent biases they left behind. To legitimize and manage their rapidly expanding empire, the Abbasid state required a dedicated historical science alongside its military conquests. Managing this new literary era required enormous capital. Caliphs like Harun al-Rashid and al-Mamun provided direct state patronage to scholars, driven by the complex administrative needs of their government. A pivotal logistical breakthrough occurred in 751 CE, following the Battle of Talis. Chinese prisoners of war introduced paper manufacturing technology to the Islamic world. Compared to expensive parchment or fragile papyrus, paper was cheap and highly scalable to produce. This specific material surplus was the primary economic enabler for a widespread explosion in writing. By 830 CE, this influx of paper found its institutional home in Baghdad with the establishment of Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. It functioned as the central engine for Abbasid research. Inside the House of Wisdom, the state funded a massive translation movement. Scholars systematically converted ancient Greek, Persian, and Syriac texts into Arabic. Absorbing these foreign documents provided Arab scholars with a multi-civilizational viewpoint. They gathered the context required to write comprehensive, global histories, rather than localized records. The combination of royal funding, the physical availability of paper, and dedicated translation centers provided the exact logistical framework needed to abandon tribal memory and build a permanent historical archive. With thousands of translated manuscripts and oral accounts flooding into Baghdad, Abbasid scholars faced a critical data problem. They needed a reliable system to separate factual events from fabrications. They developed two main structural pillars. The first was haliyat, or annals, a strict method of organizing historical data sequentially, year by year, to establish a tight chronological timeline. The second and more critical pillar was Isnad, the chain of transmission. Borrowed directly from Islamic hadith scholarship, this graph-like system traces a claim backward from the author, through each intermediary narrator, all the way to the original eyewitness. This functioned as an early form of source criticism. If an author encountered a broken chain or an unreliable narrator, the claim was flagged and rejected. Validity was determined entirely by a complete, unbroken lineage of trustworthy sources. The philosopher Allama Iqbal observed the rigor of this approach, stating, "Accuracy in recording facts, which constitute the material of history, is an indispensable condition of history as a science." By porting the strict verification techniques used for religious texts over to secular events, these historians engineered an exceptionally precise system for fact-checking the past. With these methodologies in place, the scope of Abbasid history rapidly expanded in distinct phases. The foundation focused heavily on religious biography, pioneered by scholars like Ibn Ishaq in the 8th century. In his text, Sirat Rasul Allah, Ibn Ishaq aggregated scattered oral poems and localized memories, synthesizing them into a coherent, chronological biography of the Prophet Muhammad. A few decades later, Al-Waqidi narrowed the focus. His work, Kitab al-Maghazi, applied this rigorous documentation to military operations, creating highly granular records of battlefield tactics and campaigns. Then, historians like Ibn Sa'd and al-Baladhuri pushed the discipline into administrative science. They cataloged how conquered lands were governed, objectively detailing tax systems, known as kharaj, alongside bureaucratic structures. The scope widened globally under al-Yaqubi and al-Masudi. They explicitly integrated geographic data into their writing, conducting comparative studies of the Greek, Roman, and Persian empires to place Islamic history within a broader context. This evolution culminated with al-Tabari, his monumental 39-volume work, History of the Prophets and Kings, systematically chronicled the known world from creation up to the year 915. Tabari is notable for his strict methodological neutrality. When faced with conflicting accounts of the same event, he laid the differing Isnad chains side by side. He refused to inject his own opinion, placing the burden on the reader to analyze the raw data. Finally, Miskawayh moved the discipline entirely into analytical political science. His work analyzed the underlying administrative causes of historical events, intended specifically to teach statecraft to contemporary rulers. Over a span of 300 years, Abbasid scholarship scaled history from localized religious biography into a sprawling analysis of human political behavior. While the Abbasid system was deeply methodical for its era, an objective review reveals structural blind spots in their records. As historian Bernard Lewis points out, the surviving texts suffer from extreme class bias. Almost all of this literary evidence was produced by and written for the Casa, the political and intellectual elite. Because history was funded by the state, the economic realities, daily lives, and labor of the working peasantry are largely missing from the official timeline. There was also a notable flaw in their verification engine. By obsessing over the Isnad, the chain of narrators, historians frequently neglected mutton criticism. They often failed to scrutinize whether the actual text of an event was logically possible, so long as the messengers reporting it were deemed trustworthy. Furthermore, state sponsorship guaranteed political bias. Abbasid historians routinely infused their texts with subtle anti-Umayyad rhetoric, actively working to delegitimize the preceding rival dynasty. Yet, even with these methodological and political biases, the Abbasid archival project succeeded in rescuing and preserving a vast swath of global antiquity that might otherwise have been lost. Through this immense literary effort, the Abbasid state transitioned from a Staatsnation, built primarily on military expansion, into a Kulturnation, defined by its intellectual rigor and cultural output. The analytical frameworks engineered by scholars like Tabari laid the necessary groundwork for the future. Without their careful structural models, the later sociological breakthroughs of historians like Ibn Khaldun would never have materialized. Thank you for watching. If you found this insightful, please like, comment, and subscribe.